President Obama, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and their anti-gun allies in the United Nations get their way, the cheering we heard after the Supreme Court struck down the Chicago gun ban will be a distant memory. The truth is, these are dangerous days for our Second Amendment freedoms. That's why I believe every gun rights supporter needs to be made aware of exactly what's at stake. Hello, this is Dudley Brown with the National Association for Gun Rights with an urgent message. Now, right now, the Obama administration is working hand in glove with the United Nations to pass and ratify a new so-called small arms treaty, disguised as legislation to help in the fight against terrorism, insurgency, and international crime syndicates. The UN Small Arms Treaty is nothing more than a massive global gun control scheme. But the real target in all of this isn't terrorists, insurgents, or mobsters. It's law-abiding citizens like you and like me. Although the gun grabbers have successfully kept the full details of their scheme hidden from public view to this point, from their own public statements and past versions of the treaty, you and I can get a rough idea of exactly what's being planned. The truth is, if approved by the UN and ratified by the U.S. Senate, the so-called Small Arms Treaty would almost certainly force national governments to enact tougher licensing requirements, making law-abiding citizens cut through even more bureaucratic red tape just to buy a firearm legally, order tracking devices to be installed in all firearms, which, depending on what type of system is mandated, could allow international bureaucrats to see the exact location of every firearm at any given moment, and set up the beginnings of an international gun registry, which will only set the stage for the outright criminalization and confiscation of entire classes of firearms, like semi-automatic handguns, shotguns, rifles. I don't know about you, but all this makes my stomach churn. Worse, I'm afraid that without your help, the gun grabbers could very well get their way. You see, while a few media outlets are touting the fact the UN treaty isn't set for final drafting and ratification until 2012, you and I simply can't sit back and assume we have time on our side. Gun grabbers have been salivating at the thought of an international gun control treaty since the early years of the Clinton administration. So as soon as the gun control crowd believes it has the opportunity to move the treaty through the UN and ram it through the U.S. Senate, you can bet they'll jump at the chance. After all, you and I have seen how anti-gun forces spring into action every time an unspeakable and horrible tragedy occurs somewhere in the U.S. Considering the current tenuous state of world affairs and the continuing drug violence at the Mexican border, and the fact that the Small Arms Treaty is being sold as an anti-terrorism national security measure, you and I can't take anything for granted. That's why the National Association for Gun Rights is mobilizing Second Amendment supporters all over the country against the United Nations gun schemes. Now, gun owners recognize we can't count on anti-gun countries like France or Communist China, or even our State Department, which is led by anti-gun Hillary Clinton, to defeat this dangerous treaty. It's really going to be up to you and me, and we're going to have to defeat it in the U.S. Senate. While it typically takes 67 votes to ratify a treaty, there's no stopping the Obama administration from simply ramming the provisions of the treaty into law as domestic legislation. That means they'll only need 60 votes, and with the numerous anti-gun senators on both sides of the aisle, and the fact that many U.S. senators will ratify virtually any treaty that comes to the floor to protect the supposed international prestige of our president, I'm afraid we're starting off this fight with our backs against the wall. The good news is the National Association for Gun Rights has an extensive plan to turn up the grassroots pressure on the U.S. senators to defeat the so-called Small Arms Treaty. Our plan is to contact up to 12 million Americans nationwide and mobilize grassroots on key U.S. senators to vote against the treaty, regardless of what form it takes. We'll use mail, email, and phones, work the blogs, write guest editorials, and as soon as the fight reaches the floor of the U.S. Senate, we're prepared to run hard-hitting newspaper, radio, and TV ads in targeted states. This is exactly what I believe we need to defeat the treaty. And that's why I'm asking you to sign the National Association for Gun Rights petition against the UN Small Arms Treaty. Only if U.S. senators are made aware of the true dangers of this treaty and their constituents' deep opposition to the UN's gun control scheme can we hope to defeat it. Now, unfortunately, mobilizing millions and millions of Second Amendment supporters nationwide isn't going to be cheap. The National Association for Gun Rights will literally need millions of signed petitions. As Second Amendment supporters, I believe our biggest mistake could be waiting until the UN Small Arms Treaty shows up on the floor of the U.S. Senate to actually begin fighting. So in addition to signing the petition, I also hope you'll agree to make a generous contribution of $50 or even $100 or more to the National Association for Gun Rights. I know that's a lot, but I know you understand how important this fight is. Even if you can't afford $50 or $100, I hope you'll contribute as generously as you can.